So hello everybody and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. As usual, I'm your host Hannah Munro, and with me today is Dominique Highfield, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Purplebricks. So firstly, welcome Dominique, lovely to have you with us.
Thank you, Hannah.
So today we're going to talk about, I've got loads of different topics to talk about, but let's just start off with, what was your journey, Dominique? How did you end up in your current role and how did you get there?
Well, it's a big question to start with. So I should probably add that I am the daughter of an accounting teacher and a drama teacher, and I am probably the perfect combination of the two of them. But my dad was the accounting teacher, and obviously, much like many children, was striving to make their dad proud. So after uni, I went to PwC, trained at PwC, and then landed in some quite commercial roles at Sainsbury's, Amazon, Putnam Brands. And then on my second maternity leave, I got presented with this wonderful opportunity at Purplebricks for a transformation role as CFO. And I grabbed it with both hands. I knew it was a transformation. I knew there was a cash burn. I knew there was a few issues. I probably had no idea quite how much work there was to do to transform the business and the cash burn, quite how steep that was. But I joined the CFO back in November 2022. And I then quickly had to put the business up for sale with the CEO and the board. And then we've now got new owners. We're now a private business. We've delisted. And as part of that ownership structure, I led with the integration. So we were bought by one of our competitors. We're merging the two businesses. And I was sort of put in charge of that. And then as a result of, I think, doing that relatively well, they've offered me the Chief Operating Officer role, which I've now done for coming on 2 months. That's still relatively new, but it's been sort of a commercial finance journey through to a transformation, and then sort of do my absolute best in this transformation for the business and for its customers and its employees, and then moving into this COO role as a result. So it's been a bit of a journey in the last 12 months, I know, I would say.
Yeah, it sounds like a hell of a journey in such a short space of time. So, like, looking back, I think reflections and hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? We talk a lot about this, but like looking at with hindsight, stepping into your CFO role, what do you wish you'd known as you went in? What do you think you wish you'd asked?
In a way, I probably, where we are now as a company for our shareholders, having got, it's not been the share return they would have wanted, but in the scenario that we had, it was the better of the option. So I think where we are now, actually, I'm really happy where we are for the customers and our employees and the excitement that's ahead. But I think if I could go again, or advice I would give is, I came into Purplebricks and I was really keen to get started and to be everything to everyone. So that might maybe the timing thing. And also I had a 6-month-old baby. So maybe the timing, I would have assessed timings, Hannah.
And balance. And I think it's that's something like what a combination of circumstances to be involved in. 6-month-old baby, dealing with obviously a new role as CFO, and then a challenging environment within that role. That's there's kudos to yourself in terms of coming out the end of it.
Oh well, it doesn't stop there, Hannah. I also have my daughter starting school, and we relocated for the job. So
wow.
Yeah, it was all. And I think listen, over the last few years of COVID and I think everyone's resilience has really been tested. And I'm actually, when we look back at I'm really, really proud of the resilience of me and my family and people that I work with. We've been through an awful lot, rounds of redundancies and sort of new owners and the sales process and things. And the resilience is quite phenomenal. And not everyone would have been able to cope in the way, and the exec team that we've got around the table has done brilliantly well. So it's a real test. But I think 2020 gave everyone a run for their money with COVID and what have you. So people have got very thick skins now, haven't they, and strong backs.
So you mentioned obviously the team resilience. Have you got any ideas of how and why you had that resilience? Was it a matter of we didn't have a choice resilience, or was there a secret sauce to that?
I think that part of that, when we had a cash burn and the shareholder return was key, and getting the best out. We had sort of lots of live customers as well who'd paid for our services. So actually getting through that as a trading entity with finding new owners in a safe haven was absolutely, and the responsibility that you take on that is huge. And it's a bit like being a parent, when your child's sick, you can't be sick. So it's a bit like that, right? And so there is that. But I also think when you're working with great people and you've got each other's backs and you can be honest and you can have, good relationships and a bit of downtime together as well, and knowing not just the face that's around the board, but actually their whole self and what brings them to work. I think having those good relationships and those thick relationships really helps see you through. But it was a needs must type place to be.
Yeah, and sometimes it is amazing how when you don't have a choice but to step up, that you actually can. And I sometimes think you unearth hidden layers in yourself when you're in those circumstances. So
absolutely, but it's who you're in the trenches with as well, I think, is really important. So playing to your strengths and knowing where everyone can play to their best, and knowing that you're with people that have got your back and the company's back, and you've got going for the same goal. So I think, you're absolutely right. But who you're doing it with is also really important.
So talking about that then, obviously having shifted from that CFO role to a CEO role, have you found your replacement in that CFO role? Were you a part of that recruitment piece?
So it's a funny one because we were bought by our competitors. So there was another CFO there, and so he has taken the mantle for the wider bit. His name's Deepak. He's wonderful. But it was a strange few months where we were both sort of not sure what was happening, and both wanting the best for the business, the people, the financials, and both lovely humans. He's a lovely human. So he's doing the wider group role, and meanwhile I'm in the operations role. And we work quite nicely together because we understand each other's context. And I said to the finance team, you have a COO role now who cares deeply about the cash impact, deeply about profit. So use me to your advantage. And we work quite well together. I do have to be careful I don't step on his toes. It's not fair. And I've been in a previous sort of senior finance role, and the COO was the ex-CFO. So I could get frustrated in that role. So it's important I don't step on his toes, but that we've got similar context and we're working towards the same goal. So no, he's great and we're working really well together.
So flipping on that side of the piece, obviously you've been on both sides. You've worked both. You are the CFO or somebody stepping out of the CFO role into the CEO role, and you've obviously been in the other side of the coin where you've had a CFO that steps out of role. So tell me a little bit about what you think when that dynamic happens, what you think the secret to success is, and how, if somebody else was in that in that situation or coming into that role, how you advise them to deal with it.
I think for me, communication is key, and also having aligned strategic direction where you all know where you're going and you've got the same agenda, and that removes any element of politics, I think. So if you're working towards the same agenda with the same strategic goals and you've got the same context, then I think it's really important. And there is sort of a holy trilogy between the CEO, the CFO, and the COO, and so all being on the same page. And knowing sort of what the board are after, what the chair people are after, I think that's really, really important. And then with that sort of galvanized, holy trilogy, like if you've got that galvanized relationship with three, and then you've also got that sort of wider business context, you're winning, right? And it's when you sort of, you haven't got that communication, or you haven't got the wider context, the wider business strategy to go after, that you can start going a bit adrift or stepping on toes or things. But I would say one of my default positions, and it serves me pretty well, is this assume positive intent. And I think if someone does something, or someone makes a decision, or someone goes along with something, I often assume positive intent because people are trying to get to the right answer. They're not doing it to disgruntle you. They're not doing it because they don't value you, or they're trying to step on your toes. And that can get me out of any disagreements or poor relationships by assuming positive intent, and then talking about it, having really open communication and talking about it.
Yeah, and I guess that when you're in challenging circumstances, it can be really difficult to make that assumption around positive intent. When things are, I won't say going haywire, but becoming a bit more challenging. So I think that's a really great pause for thought moment, isn't it? To consider where somebody's coming from as much as what they're saying.
Yeah. And then you don't just assume it, right? Because you should also then talk about it afterwards. But instead of sort of jumping to defaults, defensiveness or things, I think assuming that. And it's so I have it such a mantra now that if I ever do get a bit disgruntled, my team often say to me, assume positive intent? I'm like, yes. So my team has started relaying it back to me now, which does calm me down every so often.
There's nothing like hearing your own words back.
Yeah. And I realize how annoying it can be. Someone's angry, and I'm like, assume positive intent.
Oh dear. Yeah, and I think, so I guess the other question then is like, how do you manage, because there are going to be circumstances where you come into conflict, or like you say, have maybe a difference of opinion. So given that, how have you had any challenges where you've had to work through as a team where you've maybe had different perspectives on the same issue, and then how have you managed that conversation?
I think we've had a few, and we're a relatively new team at the moment, right? So we're in sort of the honeymoon period. We're quickly moving out of that, I'd say, but we're a relatively new team to come together. And I think having clear roles and responsibilities is key. Having a defined decision-making piece, having clear organisational goals and strategic direction is paramount. And I think if you've got all of those things, you've got open communication, and you understand the whole person, not just the person that they bring themselves to work. I think that's really key in sort of dissipating any disgruntlement and keeping good relationships there. But I think ultimately data is the answer. Data and customer. So if we've got a tough decision to make and we've got different views, I think getting a good set of data there, so it's a data-led decision and not an emotive one, and thinking about how it impacts the customer is and if you've got those two, then you should be fact-led and not get into the emotional disarray of that. And Amazon had a really good way of making decisions when I was at Amazon. And it was, they would write the PR release before we made a decision. So they would say, like, what does this, Purplebricks does, for customer, And actually think about it from a customer perspective, then it often helps these decisions being made. And it can, like I say, customer and data, and then remove the emotiveness. And then even if you have got different roles, you should be able to galvanize behind the same outcome.
Yeah, because there is a tendency to take to almost own a decision, or does it own an outcome versus own the decision. And I think that's an interesting piece, isn't it, where you put something forwards and if it doesn't go down that route, not to think of it as against you, and actually take the decision outside of your personal space, as it were.
Exactly. And someone's got to be accountable for the delivery of it as well, right? So yeah, that's exactly why owning the outcome of the decision is key.
So in terms of, you talked about this Trinity. I'm sure somebody's saying you can't use the term Holy Trinity.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds incredibly arrogant. We should probably stop that. the triangle.
The triangle. The three-legged stool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does a successful? I'm not sure three-legged stool has the same ring as Holy Trinity, but there you go. What does that look like when you've seen it work well?
It looks like frequent communication, honest and open, transparent, radical candor, which is sort of not always being what people want to hear, but actually what they need to hear, and saying in a way that you can have long-term relationships and sustainable relationships. So having that honesty and that transparency, and catching up often, assuming positive intent if things do go awry. And I think working together really closely and sharing the load and sharing the stresses as they come as well is really key. The last thing you want is a CEO that takes it all on themselves, because you can't do the best job then, because you can't support them and do your role. So I think a CEO that will share sort of the challenges they're facing and enable you to be part of the solution there will allow those roles all to work really well together. And the broader exec as well, I think it allows the more to play their part and support and delivery, and feel part of a wider team where they've got that sense of empowerment and belonging, which is really, really important.
And in terms of you talked about obviously sharing the load. How do you see the three roles? Where do you see the key differences from your perspective?
I think it's a really difficult one, because we're still finding our groove a little bit, but I think the CEO role for me is galvanizing hearts and minds across the business and working with our investors around longer term strategy and funding and all that jazz. And then as our face externally, we're in the property industry, and our CEO is incredibly successful and knows an awful lot about this industry. So for Purplebricks, for him to be out there talking about the industry and sort of and be our brand ambassador is really key, and working with our investors there. And then I think the COO role is more around sort of day-to-day trading and operations, and making sure that the CEO doesn't have to dip into that as much as they might be akin in the property industry, actually to keep them at an arm's length so they can go and do the stuff that only they can do. And that's what's really key. So COO, then more day-to-day operations. And then the CFO becomes the bridge between that, the investment, the funding, the cash flow, the day-to-day operations, and all encompassing there. And then looking at the spend in the functions and allocating resources appropriately. And I think if you can get those right, we're winning. I think, but there is a distinct difference between each of them, and there is a really distinct way that they can work really nicely together. Does that make sense? Have I missed anything you think the CEO or the CFO, the COO should be doing?
No, and I think sometimes, I don't know about your experience, but when I've seen it work well, it's playing to everyone's strengths. So that same triangle, as it were, doesn't always look the same in terms of responsibility. There's a similarity, but there's always a slight nuance to it in every organisation, depending on that individual strength and depending on where everyone's come from. Obviously, you've come from a real finance background, so you have that as a strength, so then it lends itself to a slightly different flavour of COO role than it would normally be. So I think that's always really interesting when I look from the outside in at different organisations, how people share the responsibilities and play to each other's strengths. And that's really interesting to hear.
I think that's really key, but I think, and I think one of the reasons that people do well in their roles is when they know their strengths, but they also understand other people's, not just at the board or exec, but in their teams. And something, particularly when you're moving fast, you've got a lot to do, is you actually can try and protect your team from too much or not empower your team enough. And I think having a really good team that you do give space to, and and empower them to go and deliver messages. You often want to look like you're all over it, right? I want to be able to answer every question that my board throws me, but I'm not doing my team justice there, and also I'm not focusing on the areas I should be focused to. So the last few weeks have been on a bit of a journey with this as well. New in role, wanting to deliver confidence. Actually, I need to give the space to the people in my team to go and deliver, and it might be their direct reports, but we have experts, and I need to cheerlead and give them the space. So I think you're absolutely right, and how that can work up, down, across, side by side. We need to do that everywhere. And then also we should be afraid to outsource. When I was CFO, I was facing these conversations I'd never done before. So not having a big ego, being relatively, not very proud, I outsourced sort of some support with cash flow. I got sort of PwC in earlier than I probably should have done. I spoke daily to our investment bankers. And I think having that, bringing that expertise in and crowdsourcing opinion really helps us. So know your own strengths, but don't be afraid of leveraging others and bringing other people in. Everyone wants to help, and it will only help you get to the right answer.
And I love that phrase around giving your team the space to grow and develop and shine. So tell me about how you find that balance, because coming into a new role, like you say, you want to be seen as the person that knows everything and and in control. But how do you find the balance? What's your secret?
And well, I'll be honest, I think I've probably got it wrong of late. So just being really candid, and it's probably feedback I get quite a lot. So when I was at Penton Brands, I'd worked up through the ranks, and so again, I struggled to let go of things and where I should have done. But I had radical candor, good relationships with my team, and then managed to do that. But it didn't come naturally, because I think particularly if you get promoted within your current company, it can be very difficult to let things go or to let somebody else take the mantle. But you really need to be able to go and do the job that you're being asked to do. So I empathise with anyone in that situation, but it's really, really important that you do, because you can't do your new job if you're trying to do your old job as well. And your team underneath are not going to be happy. But in this job, and I've explained to people, and I've gone on a bit of a journey the last few weeks, it's very pertinent, it's stress, right? It's wanting to deliver, it's stress, it's a desire to impress, and it's wanting to be all over things. And making sure that doesn't mean I do everything or I have to have the answer for everything. And I also quite maternal, wanting to shield people from the stress, so taking that on myself. But people aren't going to grow in that environment. I'm almost, it's like you need sunlight and food, right? And I'm putting the shade over them. So people aren't going to grow in that environment. People aren't going to enjoy they're not going to be able to do their best work. They need to be in those stressful environments to be able to develop and grow themselves. So I'm having a few words with myself, and I am trying to do better. But I haven't got. I'm learning from my own mistakes. So if you can learn from mine, then please do.
I think we all should take that approach, Dive. And I think anyone that thinks they've absolutely nailed it, regardless of how long they've been enrolled, probably hasn't, and is in more trouble than those of us that acknowledge that we're not doing everything.
But I think self-awareness is key, right? And being approachable so people can give you feedback, and having that self-awareness to know when you probably overstepped the mark, or when you've sort of jumped a decision and should have got someone else's involvement. And I phoned up somebody relatively junior in the organisation last week to apologise, where I made a decision and I hadn't, and it was their job. They do that. It was day to day their job, and I was trying to rapidly change something and make something better. And I changed something without discussing the person who does this day in, day out, and they had a better alternative. And they said, I'm really struggling to do my job if you sort of swoop in and do these decisions. And I phoned them up and I apologised. And since then, I've been asking them to come to certain meetings, and they're doing a brilliant job. But having that, like I said, not proud, and you apologise, and you have self-awareness and the ability for people to come to you and express where we're not doing our best work, I think is really important.
No, absolutely. And it was really interesting to hear you talk about the outsourcing when you first came into role as CFO. So how did you pick which areas to outsource and which ones to keep hold of yourselves? Like, how did you manage that decision point?
So I think it was where we had expertise. So I knew we had a cash burn problem. It was well reported. We had a cash flow problem. And so first thing I did, and actually it was offered up to me by the CEO. We've got this great person that could parachute in and help with short-term cash flow analysis. And I would have been a fool to say no. So I accepted help. Because I was new in role, I didn't have that defensiveness or anything like that. So I could accept help. So that was something that was offered to me, and I felt foolish to say no, and it worked out incredibly well. And then the other was when I was sort of having to do profit warning, and I was in that territory, speaking daily to my investment bankers, and that's risk mitigation, but it's also making sure that we're putting our best foot forward. So I think when you're out of your comfort zone, and when you need help, and the risks that are around you. And I think just mitigating that is key. So these are things that weren't our bread and butter. This was new stuff, and it was big risk territory. So that's when I decided that having people around me that had done this day in, day out was really, really important.
Yeah, so obviously, talking of the profit warning, that was obviously a very challenging situation, but there's a PR element to that. So how did you manage and mitigate and also build up your skills during that time?
And so this is where I leveraged my relationship with the investment bankers, and I was speaking to them daily, if not more. But no, this was entirely new. We had a PR agency, we had investment bankers, I had a very strong legal counsel, and I kept very close to them. And I was not proud to admit I don't know what I don't know. And that seemed to work well. But there was some late nights, there was some stress, there was sort of, scenario planning and all the things that you can probably imagine. And risk mitigation and keeping on the right side of all the shareholder legislation things is key. But it was challenging and it was new, and I'm glad I've done it, and I would probably do it again. But it was being a listed business and listed CFO is not short of stress, and it's a huge responsibility. And I've got huge admiration for anyone that does it. It's a big job.
And that's actually an interesting topic in itself, having stepped away from the listed element, part of your role. I won't ask if you miss it, but tell us a little bit about the differences that you've seen since you've made that shift into private.
Yeah, and so the company I was at before was private. Pentland Brands is a very big private business that owns Berghaus, Speedo, etc. And I think the difference is that you make decisions for longer term gains. So you make decisions for shareholders and for customers for the longer term. When you're a listed business, you have to be very mindful of your shareholder return and the next set of shareholder announcements. And you also, when you're making decisions, you have to think, right, I have to go and tell the market about this. There's various things that you can't just do and push ahead with. You need to go and tell the market on as well. So I think it's that sort of the time horizon that you're working towards, and sort of the shareholder versus customer piece, and then also that sort of every decision or every announcement we make internally, and sort of the echo chamber that is then external as well. So it can adds workload and comms requirement on quite significantly.
And in terms of how you built that skill set, because obviously you came into it, you had that big that obviously the challenge. But is that something you'd come across before? Did you have did you have a knowledge of that area of the business before you came into that public domain, as it were?
No, but what I would say is that all the things that you're presenting on are your standards. It's P&Ls, it's cash flows, it's investment. It's all very standard stuff. It's just how you then report that for the shareholders. So no, I haven't, but I think anyone that's worked in sort of commercial roles and CFO roles privately, I know that you can turn your hand to it quite adeptly. I think the hardest bit for me was being in front of the shareholders with sort of cash burn and being, you are asked very difficult questions on the spot. And so knowing your numbers inside and out in those environments is over the table in person, it is really challenging. But no, I hadn't done it before, but it's just a build on all the things that you've learned in your career to date, and just repivoting that to have conversations day in, day out with shareholders.
So rolling back to obviously your change in role and the shift to COO, was it something you've aspired to be, or was it just an opportunity that was given you in the context of Purplebricks? Like, what was your personal sort of career journey thoughts on that?
So there's a couple of things here, and the first one I should preface with Purplebricks. We focus on sort of profit warning territory and all this jazz, but it's now an incredibly exciting place to be. And when this podcast goes live, we're going to go live with our sort of our above the line advertising and our new proposition, and we're going to promote to 2 companies. So for now, I can't be happier that I'm here and doing this really exciting commercial piece. But for me, as a career perspective, I have, and in terms of it talks about that CFO to COO transition, I've been told a lot in my CFO role in my finance career to stay in my lane, and I haven't, and it's probably worked out for my benefit. But I care about financials, I care about cash, I care about profit, but I also care about people, I care about customers, and I care about impact on the environment. And I have been in rooms previously where they've been like, Dominique, just focus on the cash bit. And I think, to be honest, that was probably my super strength. But at the time, they really wanted me to stay in lane and just focus on cash. This is in previous lives and previous organizations. But in this instance, I think where the customer and the people are so determined, how we're going to perform in our profit and our cash. We're a people business. We have people out in the field going and selling to customers, and that is what drives our cash. So I think the two are really go hand in hand quite nicely, and it's a nice transition. But yeah, it's not always been. I don't know. It's not always been enamoured when I've sort of strayed out of lane, but I would encourage everyone to do it.
Yeah, and I heard an amazing quote. I think it was yesterday. I was reading something. Is that like jumping out? Being told to stay in your own lane is great because you actually get to decide what your lane is. If you think of it like that, I thought that was a pretty good way to look at it.
No, I think that's exactly right, and I think a commercial finance role does span so many different roles, and you do see it often. People move across. I really enjoy working with people. I really enjoy outcomes and trading improvements and seeing procurement savings come through or efficiencies come through, or creating a high performance culture where people are doing greater efficiency per head. And I love seeing the outcomes of things, but for me, it's more than the black and white numbers on a page. It's the decisions that get you there, and it's the people and the hearts and minds to get you there, and the process. I get quite excited about process efficiencies, which call me sad. But that to be able to streamline and get process efficiencies through that, so it feels very natural to me. It feels like a really natural step. I think it's a natural step, and I don't know what it means to me longer term. But I'm really enjoying it, and I think it's a really exciting place to be in Purplebricks right now in terms of where we are on the journey. So I'm really happy.
Fabulous. And I think that's it. It's about finding your space. Just because, you're good at something doesn't mean you have to always do it. And I think sometimes that's an exciting piece. It's going where you get the buzz, and yeah. And it sounds like you might have found your niche.
Well, I get my daughter says, she asks what her mum does for a living. She says that my mummy counts things and she looks after people. And I think that's true of the COO and the CFO. So I think that's still with me, right? So.
Absolutely. There's still numbers involved, just different ones. So you talked a lot about, obviously, team, and it's been a bit of a theme to our conversation. And whilst I know we've talked a lot about the challenges from a personal perspective, going through that crisis is as much about supporting your team as it is about, obviously, you personally. So, and I think a lot of people are facing challenging times right now. Yeah. So talk us through how you approach the team aspect of crisis management. How did you make sure that your team felt like they had the resilience to get through that time?
That's a really good question. I think also paired with that, we also had redundancies as well.
Oh gosh.
So it's giving people the resilience and the support, but also knowing they may not be with us for the longer term. So I think where possible, being as transparent as we can be. And in the process, I lost two of my closest, my direct reports, and they were both phenomenal. But I was really honest about what this looks like for them and how long we were going to need them for. And they've both secured brilliant new jobs, and we've still got in contact, and it's great. But I think having that transparency and that grown-up conversation, I think it is really key. If you're able to, I think that's really important. But I also think just being really honest around the context that you're operating. If you're under stress, sharing that as well, because they can help you. They can help you. They can take some of that off you, but they can also, if you are sort of teaching on poor decisions or poor behaviours, they can also pull you back. So having that really honest relationship. But I also think understanding them and what's outside of work for them is really key. So if they've got poorly parents, or they've got young children, or they've got this hobby that they're desperate to go, I think understanding all that stuff and being able to check in with them outside of work as well as in work is really important. And I think and sharing a bit of you as well, being human and vulnerable to them as well. I'm not afraid to say that when we announced the redundancies, I burst into tears in front of all the senior leadership team, because I care deeply and it matters. I know what these people are outside of work as well as in work. And even though we all knew it was coming, it was a really emotive time. But the feedback was actually, it was nice to see somebody, particularly a woman, actually show a level of emotion and that they care. Particularly the feedback I got was, as a woman, that people don't show their emotion. They feel that they can't. I couldn't help it. I didn't choose to, but I couldn't help it. But I think it's really important to show that vulnerable side of yourself and to show what brings you to work and what's happening outside of work. And then you can encourage that from the team as well.
And that's an interesting point you make there about women showing vulnerability, or not even vulnerability, it's just emotion and being able to do that. Do you, given the different environments that you've worked in, do you think that is a challenge, and that was something that's difficult to do in the current corporate environments?
I think I also struggle with seeing, whenever I get angry, I also get really emotional, which is really unfortunate. But I know a lot of women not struggle with it. If I get angry, then I get teary, which is a terrible place to be. But luckily, I don't get angry very often. I think men and women are both under enormous stress, and you hear about this toxic masculinity as well, where they can't show any emotion. So, and I can't pretend to understand what that's like, but I know both genders feel it. But no, I think you also, I heard somebody the other day get called bossy, and I was like, and it was a woman. She's not bossy, she's a good leader. And I think you are constantly trying to fight against stereotypes or sort of perceptions of things. And when I get emotional, I do think, I'm just playing into that stereotype. So I do beat myself up about it. But it's really hard, and I think both genders face it. And I think actually men are struggling to I think it's even less accepted in men to be able to get emotional. But it's really hard, isn't it, to fight against stereotype and give your gender a good name, and you feel a lot of responsibility on that, for sure.
Yeah, and I feel that personally, so I can definitely echo that. But I would also say, yes, I think I know myself and others are angry criers. So
Yes.
You know, I think shout out to the men, like crying can not just mean upset, it can
No,
mean angry
crying
too.
doesn't mean I need a hug. Crying means I'm really angry at you. Like, I'm really angry right now. I've assumed positive intent for long enough, and now I'm just angry.
But I think that's the same for men. It's just that they show it in sometimes in different ways. But I think they also have that same issue. And I think it's an interesting observation. Actually, it's probably harder for men to show that depth of you know, being upset in front of people, which is always challenging.
Coming full circle back to the beginning of the session, actually, we talked about what makes good teams and what makes the trilogy work and all that stuff. And I think having that vulnerability and showing that emotion to each other and being aligned externally. So you have those different conversations with each other and you show your vulnerability to one another, and then you stand up in front of the organization and you're united. And I think that's really, really powerful. So that vulnerability comes full circle again, right, to build good teams and great relationships. And I think it's really important. So as much as it might play into these stereotypes and be uncomfortable for people, I think it is really important. And we're under huge stress. So it's inevitable.
And I think that whole being able to be vulnerable with your trilogy is really important. Being able to share emotion freely and understand where everyone's at is incredibly powerful. Like you say, when you come together. So that kind of takes us full circle. You've wrapped it up incredibly well and looped us back around to the beginning. So you've done my job for me. Thank you.
Sorry, Hannah. Sorry.
No, it's great. It means I can just sit back and
sorry.
But one of the things I think, you know, with your unique perspective, for somebody that's coming into a new C-level role, whether that's CFO, CEO, or maybe CEO, what are your top tips for making that first 6 months a success? What would you recommend to them?
So there's a lot in there. I'd say don't be afraid to stay in your lane. I love what you said, Hannah, around create your own lane. But not staying in your lane might be your super strength. Don't be afraid of showing your vulnerability and showing yourself outside of work. I think it'll be a way you can forge great relationships really quickly. Understand other people in your team and on your wider exec team and where their strengths lie, so you can play to them, and understand and back your own strengths and where you can slot in. But overall, don't give yourself it's a big enough job as it is. You don't need any, you just cut yourself a break. So don't try and do too much too fast. Take your time, get to know the business, get to know people, empower your team. And don't stay in lane. It's no fun staying in lane.
I think that should be the title of this podcast. So thank you so much, Dominique, for joining me on this show. And obviously, for those of you listening, I'm sure you've enjoyed it as well. But if there's some questions you feel like I should have asked, then please do let me know. And you never know, we might get a view from the COO's desk in a year in, perhaps, and I can re-ask those questions. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, then of course, please do leave us a review. Do send me a shout out on LinkedIn. It's always very welcome. And Dominique, is there anything that you want to share with us in terms of if people want to know more about you, about Purplebricks, where's the best place to learn?
No, I mean, I think anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And it's a really as this is being aired in January, I think it's going to be really exciting and people are going to see lots more from Purplebricks. So if anyone wants to talk about it or get in contact, you can contact me on LinkedIn. And I'll be happy to talk about any questions anyone's got.
Fabulous. And we'll pop the link to Dominique's profile in the show notes as usual. Well, thank you to our listeners for joining us. And again, please do like, rate and review this podcast, and I hope to see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.